Hello and welcome again to Red Right Hand Forge. This is Marshall, and in today's video we're going to be putting together some Raindrop Damascus. And if you're not familiar with that pattern, Raindrop is it's pretty straightforward, really. It's not too complicated, but there are a lot of ways that it can get screwed up along the process. Essentially, I've got two bars of 1/8 inch steel. We're going to be alternating 15N20 and 1084 steel. And I'll stack that probably about 8 high, and we're going to draw that out, smush it all together, and then cut it up again either to thirds or fourths and stack it again, push it out again, and I'll probably get up into a higher layer count than I normally do. Again, I really like low layer Damascus because I just think it creates a nice bold contrast. But with Raindrop, it tends to look a little basic if you don't get a higher layer count. So I'll probably go a little higher than I normally do. So yeah, we'll see how that works out. Hopefully we won't run into any issues along the way. One thing I know we have to kind of watch out for is because we're taking so much material away between grinding off the forge scale and cutting it and stacking it again and welding everything up, you really lose a lot of material in that process. And then once you get close to your finished billet, you're going to go in again with your drill bit and start digging out, little cavities to create that raindrop pattern. So you're really removing a lot of steel along the way. So we're going to start with a big chunk of steel, and hopefully by the time we're done, we still have enough to make a knife. All right, let's see what happens.
The first step here is just going to be cleaning up what we have. These come from the factory with a little bit of mill scale on them, and to make sure that they stick properly, you want to make sure you grind that off. I like to use a wire cut brush. I've seen people use flap discs and grinding wheels. I find that kind of pits into it, and I don't like that. So the wire brush does a good job with that. One thing you might want to remember to do is relabel if you're not using the whole bar. I've got some mystery steel over in my stack because I've cut pieces off and I didn't remember to relabel what the remaining steel was. So take a Sharpie and put your label on there so you know what you're dealing with in the future. Also, stay safe out there. Make sure when you're grinding steel you're wearing your respirators. I like to use these little disinfectant wipes to clean out my respirator every time I use it. As you can see, I've just got a little makeshift stop. An upright 2x4 happens to be just the right size to set a consistent position. So when I cut these bars, they're all same size. I don't remember what size I made this, and it's really not that important as long as they're consistent and uniform. Once we chop all these down, we're just going to take them over the grinder and clean them up a little bit before we get ready to weld. I've got a couple pieces here that I went a little crazy with the grinder. That's okay, as long as there is a flat side. You can see the other side's flat, so I'll just put that on the outside of my stack. No big deal. It is important to make sure that you keep these steels separated. Otherwise, you're going to have two pieces of 1084 stacked together or more, or vice versa, and you're going to end up with some thick layers. It wouldn't cause a problem functionally, but unless that's what you're looking for, you'll end up with a lower layer count. With some thick layers and some thin layers. I didn't want that, of course, so I'm making sure that I alternate these with each layer being a separate type of steel. Using a little kerosene, clean them up before I stack them all together, and we get to it. Now before we do our first weld set, we want to make sure we get some flux down in there to flow through these layers, push out all the oxygen. And then we put it back into the forge. It's very important when you do that first forge weld set to make sure that you get this billet up to the right temperature. I like to go for this, I call it like a stick of butter color. And once I get to that color, depending on the thickness that you're working with, I like to let it soak at that temperature for about 10-15 minutes. That way you know it's heated through. And then on this first pass with the hydraulic press, you can see I'm not being aggressive at all, just real gentle, getting those layers to set. And then it goes right back into the forge. As we move forward, you can get a little more aggressive. I mean, at this point, they should all pretty much be one solid piece of steel now. So now we're just kind of shaping and drawing it out. We'll draw this out to about 10 inches this round. And I'm ultimately going to chop this up into 3 pieces and then stack them and weld them again before we move on to the next phase. Once you get this to the size that you want, it's really important to try to make sure you get this as straight as possible. I usually take over the anvil, I didn't show it on camera here, and kind of make sure I've got it nice and flat. If you've got bends in this, that's just steel that you're going to have to shave off because you really need all these to be flat. They don't have to be uniform thickness, but you do have to have flat sides mated up against other flat sides. So the best way to achieve that with the least amount of grinding away is to make sure you get that billet as straight as possible. As you can see, just chop this up again. Pretty terrible weld job, but it doesn't matter. The forge is going to weld everything together anyway. And I've got 3 thick layers there. So, 3 times 8 is 24, so we're at 24 layers. Basically repeat this process, except for this time I get a little more aggressive and I draw this out to about 13 inches and I cut it up into 4 pieces. We don't get a lot of footage this round because I actually had an accident with my camera stand. That thing broke and I was forced to kind of get creative with my camera angles. So I've got the camera set up in a vise in a couple places here, and as you can see, you're getting maybe not the best angles and my arm gets in the way here. So kind of bear with me. In the next round, I get my camera set up back the way I like it, and we'll have a little more quality filmmaking moving forward. But for now, you just have to deal with it. One thing that I didn't mention before, but it is important as soon as you start cutting these billets, is to make sure that you put some sort of indicator on which side is up and which side is down, especially if you did an even number of layers. That way you know one side is 1084 and the other side is 15N20 or whatever kind of steel you're using. You don't want to lose track of that, or again, you're going to have very thick layers mixed in with some very thin layers and it won't be consistent throughout. So make sure you keep track of that along the way there. I really struggled welding my rebar handle onto these things, so this time I tried to use just a little excess piece of steel. I left one of the little pieces of the billet kind of hanging out the back there, and that worked pretty well, except for I probably didn't leave it long enough. You'll see here there's a couple times where I actually dropped the billet on the floor because I just don't have enough to grab onto, and that's something I'm just kind of figuring out as I go here. I think next time I'll do that technique. I'll just leave a little bit more steel hanging off as a tail there so I have something better to grab onto. But I manage. Now that we're up to 96 layers, I'm not gonna cut this up again. We just want to find a size that allows us, it's thick enough where it allows us to dig in with a drill bit so we can start working on that raindrop pattern, but not so thick that when we press out again that it pushes out that pattern and flattens it out completely. So you got to kind of find that happy medium. Again, it's important to try to keep it as straight as possible. That way when we take it over to the surface grinder here, we're not shaving off a ton of material and not wasting a lot of steel. I did a pretty good job of it, so it didn't take long before I got down to bare metal. And I wasn't a perfectionist about it either. It's not a completely clean piece of steel. I just need to get enough of that scale off so I know what I'm working with, and we can start digging in with our drill bits here. This drill bit wasn't sharp enough, so we went ahead and took care of that before we move forward. It's important to set, at least mentally, but I like to use my stop on my drill press to make sure that I'm not going too deep into the billet. Really, if you go past the halfway point, you run the risk of one of the cavities on the other side of the billet running into another one, and then you'll end up with a hole. Definitely don't want that. Yes, if you have a hole, you could forge press it together and close that hole up, but you are going to end up with, I guess, a scaly part of the billet, because if it's too thin in those areas, you're just going to be left with scale where you pressed it all out, if that makes sense. So you want to be careful. You see I'm not going too deep here. That way when I flip it over, I don't have any instances where I actually went through to the other side. But you also want to make sure you go deep enough to where when you press this out to the size of the billet that you want, you still show the pattern. And as you move forward and you start grinding your bevels, you want to make sure that you got a pattern that's deep enough to where you can see it as it goes all the way close to the edge as the blade gets thinner. So it really is kind of a feeling out process. And this is the first time I've done Raindrop Damascus, and I don't want to give any spoilers here, but I'm very happy with the way this turned out, and I think I'm kind of lucky that I didn't screw that part up. That was my biggest concern, is I wasn't sure about the depth here. I've seen a lot of videos on it, but you know, until I tried it myself, I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to end up with. I was a little concerned that I didn't go deep enough and that this pattern wouldn't show through, but luckily that wasn't the case. At this stage, we want to start thinking about what size knife we want to make with this billet. So I'm being mindful of that as we kind of round everything up and get close to our final dimensions here. I want to make something that's a little bit beefy, so I'm leaving a bit of thickness on this billet. I think I've got enough to work with, as long as there are no inclusions or cold shunts or anything like that. That's plenty for a good sized blade. Just going to drop it into the acid etch here so we can take a look at the pattern and see what we came up with. And here we are, the final result. I'm really thrilled with this. Keep in mind, I didn't surface grind all the way down to clean steel, and this is only 36 grit, so it still looks rough, but it's actually a pretty solid piece of steel. And I really can't wait to dive into this and start working this into a blade. I'm excited to see how it looks as we start grinding those bevels and thinning out some areas. I want to see how those patterns develop and evolve as we start to shape this into something functional. So yeah, this is a great success, and hopefully moving forward we'll have a pretty awesome knife when this is all said and done. Well, alright, I guess that's it for this video. In the next one, I will try to turn this billet into a knife. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you learned something. I certainly did. I really appreciate you guys stopping by and taking the time to check these videos out. And if you like what you see, please hit the like button, and I would love it if you'd subscribe to my channel if you want to see more coming up. If you have any questions or comments, as always, just leave them down in the comments field, and I'll definitely get back to each and every one of you. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.